and you have great memories about Ron. At a moment in time when our department was really, I think, wrestling with where it is and who it was, yet once more. And I'm so proud that the American Culture Center can really be part of Rickey's career and to play host today. And Professor Waldo Martin has been around since the beginning of American Cultures and before. So saw the fight for a curriculum that was aimed at democratizing UC Berkeley's education, of bringing race front and center into the teaching of what it meant to be a Berkeley student. And so with no more said, I'd like to introduce Rickey and Professor Waldo Martin to talk about this most amazing book. If you could just welcome them, please.
Dr. Rickey Vincent is no stranger to all of you. I assume he is a highly acclaimed scholar, educator, radio host, and author. I get this from his website. No, I know, Rickey, this is all true. Dr. Vincent is presently a lecturer in the African American Studies and African Diaspora Studies Department here at Berkeley. He has also taught at various institutions throughout the Bay Area. In addition, he has lectured widely on a range of topics, and these include recent African American music and culture, notably funk, soul, and hip hop. His current interests include the globalization of African American culture, especially the globalization of hip hop, and something you may not know, but if you scroll TV like I do, not surprisingly, and with telling results, he has appeared in a number of film documentaries on modern African American music and culture, and he has done so with insight and with style, which is often difficult in documentaries. Dr. Vincent received his PhD in ethnic studies here at Berkeley in 2008. Wow, 7 years ago. Seems like an eternity.
May 12th.
May 12th. I am proud to say that I served on his dissertation committee, and that piece of work, a fine dissertation indeed, served as a springboard for what soon became the book under discussion today, Party Music, the inside story of the Black Panthers band and how Black power transformed soul music. But taking the liberty to riff on that subtitle, it is clear that Professor Vincent's work, original, engaged, and engaging, tells us not only how Black power transformed soul music, but how soul music transformed Black power. Before I really knew Rickey, I had heard his Friday night History of Funk radio show on KPFA because a friend told me I had to do so. I didn't know who he was. But literally bowled over by that radio personality. And I don't know, do you still use that for Guru magazine? Or has that followed you?
It's followed.
But anyway, you know, he has a radio personality too. He has a professorial personality. He has a husband. He has multiple personalities. But I immediately became a fan of the show, and whenever I can, I tune in. The problem is the older I get Friday night, often at that time, I'm sort of like already asleep. So long before meeting Rickey, I sort of knew him. The other way I knew Rickey was I'm a huge fan of African American music, especially the funk. And so when his book came out, I immediately bought it and read it. And this is the funk music book. There are copies over there. Funk, the music, the people, and the rhythm of the one, which came out in 1996. It became a book that I read carefully and deeply admired. So all of this happened before I met him. can't remember exactly when I met him, but I knew we developed a relationship because he wanted to get a PhD here. And I sat on his committee, and so I've come to know him as a graduate student as well as a colleague. And let me point out to you that it has been a humbling as well as a catalytic experience. One anecdote will hopefully suffice. During his orals exam, and if you ever go through these, let me tell you, they're often dry and that word perfunctory, but not Rickey's. And so I said, well, I'm going to lively up this affair. And so I brought in some album covers from one of my favorite funk groups, Parliament Funkadelic, and these are pretty notorious album covers. And true to form, as throughout the entire exam, Rickey responded to my my attempt to be provocative with insight and a lot of just deference. But his response, I must say, was superior to the question. In fact, having become a friend, I can say that I think I learned and continue to learn more from him than he learns and has learned from me. This is certainly the case with the book on the Lumpin, which is a pioneering book, it's a very rich book, and from my point of view, a very illuminating dissection of the Lumpin, this four-man singing group that sang the songs and danced the moves of the Black Panther Party. Now, a close friend and I, Josh Bloom, wrote a book, Black Against Empire, the history and politics of the Black Panther Party. So we knew about the Lumpin, but I can honestly say that I didn't know the Lumpin like Rickey knows the Lumpin. And party music has helped both Josh and I to hear and to see the Lumpin anew. Because I've already gone on too long, I'll lay out now, rather than after Rickey has talked, the questions I'd like to hear him pursue, but true to the spirit, these questions don't even have to mean anything to anybody. If the spirit leads us somewhere else, so be it. We'll forget my questions. But I've been told I'm supposed to ask a question or two. First, I'd like to hear Rickey speak more expansively. This just means, taking it wherever he wants to take it, regarding what his work tells us about the cultural politics of the Black Panther Party in particular, and the cultural politics of the Black Power movement, of which the party is a crucial part in general. Just sort of, he does a lot of this in the book, but just to open it out and push it even further. In my reading, and this is the way I interpret it, and he, I think, agrees, but if he doesn't, he'll tell you. Party music shows conclusively that the all too often alleged border between the culture and politics of the party in particular and Black power in general was porous and mythic. Second, drawing upon his own work, party music in particular, I'd like to hear Rickey speak expansively to sort of the trajectory of African American music in the late 20th century, because he knows a lot about everything. So I'd just like to hear what he thinks are the key moments or the major shifts in the history of the music and culture, say between 1960 and and today. Last, where do we go from here? Assuming something will follow hip hop and rap, and it may already be here and I've missed it. If so, please let me know, Rick. I'm prone to that, cluelessness. I've been accused of that by my kids on more than one occasion. So it won't surprise me if there's something out there that's cutting edge and I haven't heard it and don't know about it. But enough of me. Without further ado, it's star time. Let's give it up to my good friend and colleague, Dr. Rickey Vincent.
Thank you, Waldo, Mr. Martin. That's a qualified introduction. Thank you very much. To live up to that. Thank you all for coming to the talk. I want to thank Sarah Lapis students for coming to check this out. Maybe get a little deeper into the funk, to the roots, into the source where this music came from. I want to thank Victoria Robinson and American Cultures Department for allowing me subject matter, academics, and community cultural production all at once. It's kind of what this work is doing. So I have this picture up here because I grew up in Berkeley at the height of the revolution. There was a lot of revolutions taking place at the end of the 1960s. There was a Black Power revolution, there was an anti-war upheaval, a social revolution. There was a generation gap where a lot of folks your age were running away from home, heading to the Bay Area to try these new chemicals, try these new adventures, try this new music, travel around in a VW van and follow the Grateful Dead. There was a lot of different ways people were escaping, or taking their rebellion to a very tangible level. That, compared to today, it was a whole different thing. It was a whole generation that was turned away. The military draft had a lot to do with that. It took every young male and sort of made them subject to the whims of the state. Every young male was given a draft card, right? So they were told they had to go. And so what that meant was an entire generation was looking at the system as somehow as their enemy, and something they were in opposition to. So Berkeley was ground zero for so much social upheaval and critical analysis, critical protest. So that was just in my blood. But I was a kid at the time. I sort of moved through it, but my parents were activists. My mother was in the Black Panther Party here briefly, and then she moved on to this organization called the Third World Women's Alliance, which is a pioneering women of color activist organization in the 70s. I was just a party animal in the 70s. Did a lot of funk until disco took over, and I became a music snob and didn't really want to listen to what was on the radio, collected records. And then came here as an undergrad and developed a historical perspective on this music. I worked under a man by the name of Professor Ollie Wilson. And as I learned the history of black music, all these pieces started to fit. All the funk I had listened to, James Brown, George Clinton, Sly and the Family Stone. Okay, some of this fits. And then on his final day of this 2-semester course on the history of black music, Ollie Wilson brought his scratchy 45s of James Brown super bad. He said, this is where our music has come from, West Africa all the way to James Brown. That's what I'm talking about. That's his last day. My first day, when I start teaching, is going to be James Brown super bad. We'll go from there. That's what I have framed things. But there was also an undercurrent of politics, of resistance that I knew took place in the music. So when it was time to go back to graduate school, after an undergrad here, I went to SF State and studied in the ethnic studies program at SF State. That's ground zero for ethnic studies, you guys. That's where it began, okay? So if you're interested in ethnic studies, there's low-rent ethnic studies and there's hardcore ethnic studies. Not this is low-rent ethnic studies, but ethnic studies is spread out, but it's hardcore over there. So they were heavy on your African retentions, heavy on ethnic aesthetics and traditions, and very serious experience. And that developed sort of foundation for the history of funk book that some of you have taken a look at. Came here in 2001 looking for a vision, looking for a way to understand what I had come up with. I had come up through the Black Power revolution. I had come up through the 70s and 80s through the music. And I wanted to kind of see how does the civil rights movement and the music that I knew and loved, how do they interact? What's their relationship? I remember my my mom always had revolutionary books around. She had the autobiography of Malcolm X, Kwame Nkrumah. They were all men from that time period. And all of them talked in terms of social change, in terms of politics, in terms of the political and economic realities. And for some reason, I always thought there was a cultural dimension to social change. And one book that she had was from this leader from a West African country called Guinea-Bissau. His name was Amilcar Cabral. And he had a lot of essays that he talked about the role of culture in social change. And he wrote, a people who free themselves from foreign domination will not be culturally free unless, he says, without underestimating the importance of positive contributions from other cultures, unless they return towards the paths of their own culture. He says the latter is nourished by the living reality of the environment and rejects harmful influences as much as any kind of subjection to foreign cultures. He says, we see therefore that if imperialist domination has the vital need to practice cultural oppression, national liberation is necessarily an act of culture. Necessarily an act of culture. So what he's saying is when the people decide to free themselves, they're going to start to discover themselves. They're going to start to know themselves. Okay? And they're going to go through a process of sort of redefining who they are. You guys catch that? It was like he says, culture is where it happens. And if you study some of your history books, they'll say, well, this election happened, or this coup d'etat happened, and then the culture changed in that society. And Amilcar Cabral says, well, the people are already making these changes take place, and then these events sort of crystallize and change. And so I started to look at that, and I said, there's a cultural realm to all these social movements. So when I got here as a grad student, I said, well, let me look at these civil rights history books and see what they say about James Brown. Because to me, James Brown was the most important soul brother in the civil rights movement. And to me, a soul brother in the civil rights movement was kind of important because he was helping people to define themselves. Okay? He was helping redefine black masculinity, better for worse, but he was moving the dial. Okay? He was changing people's impressions. He's super bad. I'm black and I'm proud. Whoa. People hadn't said that before in their music. So he was changing the game. Read this massive book on the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, went through the index. James Brown's name wasn't there. Wait a minute. James Brown was at this event, and I know he was at that rally, and I know he was at this thing, but he's not told. The story of civil rights and sort of the politics of that movement sort of was leaving out this cultural component. The cultural component is how people's daily lives are lived. Okay? It's what you listen to in the morning when you turn on the radio. It's what food you eat. It's how your language, how your slang, your vernacular, how you talk to people, how you do your hair. And trust me, black hair was a big deal then as it is now. Okay? My wife tells me that I'm unqualified to talk about that aspect of social movements. But the hair thing was definitely there. Some folks, Walter Martin probably remembers, I think it was Robin Gregory. She was at, I think, Howard University. She was the homecoming queen in 1967, and she wore an afro at this historically black college, and it started a new ripple. I mean, it started such a scene. It's actually in one of the segments of Eyes on the Prize, which is this highly regarded 10-part, multi-part documentary series on the civil rights movement. Robin Gregory's hair was an event. Okay? That just gives you a sense of how significant cultural change, the evolution and the change in cultural values is to a movement. So from my point of view, I wanted to really understand the civil rights, Black Power movement, this period when I was young, I was called the Negro, and then as the decade moved to the 70s, I was called Black. I was like, how did this transformation happen? Was it a law passed by the Nixon administration? Was it, you know, some official decree, or did it come from the ground up? So I was trying to connect those things together. So coming out of that school of thought that social change is in the culture, it was clear to me that Black culture is in the music. You can find out what's happening in Black culture by studying the music. You have a narrative of what Black folks have been going through. It goes back hundreds of years. You know what you're listening to. So I set out looking for the music of the Black Power period, and it's scattered. It's full of contradictions, just like the Black Power period is full of contradictions. Some of the music is really racially charged, putting down white people, putting up Black people. There's some real intense emotions coming out. Some of the music is about building new society. Some of the music is just about a spirit of togetherness. That's where soul music is. Soul music was the sound, Motown calls itself the sound of young America. Soul music was the sound that glued the entire Black community together. And wealthy, impoverished, middle class, lower class, everybody listened to soul music. So I started to look at that and said, okay, well, sort of unpack what was happening in soul music. Back then, you had soul music, you had jazz, you had gospel music, you had rock and roll, you know, crossover, popular music. You had Black music in these separate places. But I wanted to see what was happening in soul music. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, a friend of mine named Boots Riley, he's a rapper. He has a group called the Coup. Is that in anybody's lesson plan? And Boots Riley and the Coup? And Pam? Boots Riley, he knew I was an academic of sorts, so he would always give me a call and say, Rick, you should look into this one. Rick, I got one for you. Check this out. And he said, Rick, did you know that Black Panthers had a funk band? And we both had a big laugh about that. Wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Because Black Panthers, as we were raised to believe, Black Panthers represented this. You guys, does everybody see the picture? Okay. And what do you see? You see guns. Okay. You see berets. You see some stoic, militant, steely-eyed, no BS. Serious guy, and this wasn't posed. They were there. Okay? Because if you study the Black Panther Party for any period of time, you'll know that they were under siege from mid-1967 onward. So there were a number of times, places where the police were in regular assault on Black Panther facilities. This is Bobby Seale, and that's who we knew. Those are the two co-founders of the organization. And so this is what most of the world knows about when they think about the Black Panther Party. When the documentaries are done, they think about Huey and Bobby in this way. Okay? And they're seen as guerrilla fighters. They're seen as revolutionaries. You guys have seen the Che Guevara t-shirts, there's a picture of Che Guevara on it. You guys have seen that, right? And so that represents something of like someone who was incorrupted, someone who was a militant that took on the system. What about this? What does this represent? It's the same guys. It's the same guys, and these guys, you can just see the love that they have. You can see the warmth that they have. You can see the style that they have. So they're representing a whole different human dimension to the fact that these are two of the most targeted enemies of the state at the time that the Black Panther Party was in operation. Obviously, so what I want to get at is this notion of what is a revolutionary kind of needs to be really rethought. This has a lot more style involved. A little later in the 70s, he's got the, I'm not a fashion expert, but you can tell they're high style, although they have some serious business to do. So that's Billy Jennings. And if anybody walks up Telegraph Avenue to the school, some of you do that, right? You ever walk past Rasputin's records and there's all these kind of pictures and little snippets of like Black Power history and Black Panther memorabilia and stuff? That's him. He's responsible for that stuff. Billy Jennings. He's the archivist, really, of the party that's happening. And so he's the co-founder of the organization. Okay, who's this?
Jimmy.
Okay, what's revolutionary about this? Plays his guitar backwards. Well, so what?
Part of the bridge into the dominant culture.
Say what?
He was part of the bridge into, like, to give a black face in the dominant music culture in America.
Well, he brings a black face, but he doesn't just show up imitating what the dominant culture is presenting. He transforms what the dominant culture began with and takes it to another place. So Jimi Hendrix, in many ways, broke down a lot of barriers. And that people just sort of assume, well, rock and roll is this. If you're going to play rock and roll, you have to look a certain way, you have to play a certain way, you have to sound a certain way. You have to dress a certain way. Quiet as It's Kept, but it's in chapter 7 of Party Music. He was not well involved, but he was familiar with members of the Black Panther Party all across the country. In part because they would come backstage and talk to him and say, can we get an endorsement? Can you support us? Boom, 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 boom. And he didn't run from them. As a matter of fact, the two members of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party in Seattle, they went to high school with him. And so they knew him, and he knew them, and on his last performance in Seattle, he asked the Black Panther Party to do security for his event, for his concert in Seattle. So they're not on separate islands in ways you might think. So they were both into changing the way people look at the world. Who's this? Everyone in this room, if you live in the Bay Area for any period of time, you should be familiar with Sylvester Stewart, also known as Sly Stone, the leader of Sly and the Family Stone. His music did more to change music between him and James Brown. Those two did more to change music than almost anybody else of this generation, of previous generation. Was he a radical political activist? No. Was he able to change the hearts and minds of a lot of people? When you start to investigate Sly and the Family Stone, the standout, and you start to see, wait a minute, different strokes for different folks. Wait, he's preaching tolerance and the celebration of diversity. Don't call me nigger whitey. He's dealing with racial confrontation between equals, right? None of this is to get through this confrontation so we can all take you higher. He's teaching people how you're supposed to get along in a diverse society. But he's teaching you in a way that goes through your soul. That's what music does. So that's live stuff. At Woodstock, which is one of the biggest concert events of the 1960s, right? And many people say his performance was one of the biggest moments of the biggest events during that time period. So that's why it's known at the top of the world. So back to Boots Riley. Well, there's this guy, of course. Can you recognize his pixelated face? That's James Brown. Not on stage, in the world, in the community. And he's got the afro, so you know that was taken between 1968 and 1970. So, 2002, I was in a graduate program here, and I worked under a man by the name of Ron Takaki, who said so many brilliant things. They just start to come out. But one of the things he said is, all your work is autobiographical. Everything you do is autobiographical. Don't tell me that. I wanted to go study something this way and study something that way, and it just kind of set me back. Let me just say, where did I come from? And see if I can find inspiration for my work from where I come from. So when Boots Riley said the Black Panthers had a funk band, okay, I come from the funk, I come from Black Pop. Okay, let's see what I can do with it. And I approached a journalist at KPFA Radio, his name is Walter Turner, and I asked him, do the Panthers really have a band? He said, yeah. They were called the Lumpin'. And he actually had the 45 RPM single. And at that point, I was like, wait a minute, the Black Panthers really had a band. They played music that was original sounding music, but it was really based on soul music that everyone had known and everyone had heard in the past. So they actually went out of their way to do covers, remakes of established soul songs, but then perform them with the message of the Black Panther. And as I started to get into it, I went to Billy Jennings, who you saw a picture, an older picture of him, and he told me where some of the former Lumpin' members are and what they did. And I started to do some investigating, some researching, and some interviewing. And I realized that all four of those guys are still breathing. Mark, William Calhoun, Michael Torrance, and Clark Bailey. Oakland-based group of rank-and-file Panthers operated from the summer of 1970 through the spring of 1971. They performed soul songs with lyrics at the party line. There they are, and eventually I got to know all of these guys. I asked them, what was it like posing for some publicity shots? And they said we weren't posing, we were tired. We had been in security all night, we were pissed off, we didn't want to be bothered, but they wanted a picture to promote this group. And as it turns out, I found that these young men, they weren't just hanging around the scene. These were young men that had actually music aspirations of their own as teenagers. But in 1967, 1968, 1969, the revolution that was in the air in the Bay Area had taken them over. And each one individually had made a decision to join the Black Panther Party and basically commit their lives to this organization. Now, what happens is the Black Panther Party, for whatever understanding you guys have, it's a multifaceted organization, and it went through some very distinct kind of phases of its existence. And so when it was first formed in October Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, they had developed a 10-point program for the liberation of black people. But they knew the reason they created the organization was because of, maybe this is a surprise to you or not, rampant police brutality throughout black communities. Isn't that amazing? It's raw today as it was back then. That's for a bigger discussion. But they had a plan. They had devised a method, and this is one thing that people are starting to deal with in terms of monitoring the police. They had devised a method to monitor the police. They would follow the police cars that were in their neighborhood following other people. And at the time, they had Second Amendment rights to bear arms. But they had done their homework. They weren't just acting out. They had studied what Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had done, what the NAACP had done, with other organizations in the South, the Deacons for Defense, other self-defense organizations that had war veterans and well-trained, former military people that knew what was up with the requirements of armed self-defense, groups like that. They had done their homework, and they went on patrols of the police. And what that did caused such a stir. The police had a fit trying to figure out, okay, wait, are they breaking the law? Well, they're not breaking the law, but that means we can't break the law. So we don't want them around. So they messed up. They really disrupted how law enforcement in the East Bay was able to get away with what they were getting away with. Shortly after that, law enforcement started to figure a few things out, and so the assemblyman that was in the East Bay, his name was Donald Mulford, I think, he set up, initiated a bill in the state legislature to outlaw the bearing of arms. And it was specifically as a result of what the Black Panther Party was doing to police the police. You guys follow that? This was in the spring of 1967. And Huey Newton and others, Huey sent Bobby Seale and others to Sacramento to protest the pending legislation to disarm the black community, basically. But by going to Sacramento, by bearing arms and walking in the state capitol, they knew it would cause a media firestorm, and it did. So the media firestorm was predictable. There were headlines across the country and around the world. Negroes storm state capitol. Armed Negroes invade California state capitol. And what it did was it invigorated a younger generation that said it's time to fight the power. And it really, if you will, freaked out the establishment that something like this was possible, that the movement had led itself to this point. And that inspired a lot of people. It inspired one of the people, named Mott, who have a guest here today, so he's going to talk to you a little bit before we're done about what inspired him to join this organization. So those four young men from different directions decided to join the organization. Three of them are actually at San Jose State in 1968. And if anybody, any athletes in the room? Few athletes in the room? In 1968, there was an Olympic, that was an Olympic year, right? The Olympics were being held in Mexico City. But at the time, the student movement and the movement against racial discrimination was so strong, there was a call put out for all black athletes to boycott the Olympic Games, to show what America's taking for granted, okay? And so to expose the injustices that are happening to African Americans. And that eventually, boycott was sent away, but it led to the famous protest that you guys have probably seen. It's on the cover of my book. The two guys raising their black power fists on the podium at the Mexico City Olympics. San Jose State. 3 of these people, 1, 2, 3 of them were organizers at San Jose State at the time. They were part of the radicalization of the student movement that was taking place all over the country. And 3 of these young men got to know each other at San Jose State. They tried to begin a Black Panther chapter in San Jose. And that didn't quite take place, so eventually they were called to San Francisco, and they started doing work in San Francisco and in Oakland. And lo and behold, as they were doing their party work, Panther party work, they would start singing. And as they started saying, just making up lines, making up rhymes. Does anybody make up rhymes today as you go about your business? They would make up songs. And people heard them, leadership heard them, because leadership valued their trust. They all had high integrity, even though they were rank and file members. And it was Emory Douglas, who was the Minister of Culture at the time. And Emory Douglas heard them and said, you know, you guys could do some songs for us. You could help us reach out to the community. Because after the showcase of sort of their military, their courage in the spring of 1967, chapters sprung up around the country, and law enforcement initiated a number of actions against them. So throughout 1967 and 1968, there was a lot of confrontation with the Black Panther Party and law enforcement across the country. And so what happened was Huey Newton, the founder of the organization, the ideological leader, started to realize this isn't helping. This isn't helping our goal of working with the community. So they devised a number of operations. They called them survival programs to reconnect the party to the community. The most famous one was the Breakfast for Children program, where they went into usually churches, and they would get businesses to donate goods, eggs and bread and stuff, and they would make breakfast for the kids in the Oakland community who were hungry and couldn't learn. So they went out of the way as an organization to set up these breakfast programs, bring kids in, and give them nutrition so they could go and start the day. You guys got that? So they started to connect to the community. At the same time, they were having all these clashes and confrontations with law enforcement. And so Newton's vision was to connect the party back to the community. One way to connect to the community is through the music, and that's where the lumping. The lumping perform at Barrows College in Oakland. This is in San Francisco. This is them actually in New York City. They went on the road. I'm going to play you an example of their music. So that's them dancing. The lumping perform a dance routine that involves stomping a racist cocker to try to brutalize a member of the community. Hey, no, don't do that. The lumping use dance and choreography as well as music to deliver the Panther Party message. Okay, so I'm going to play you an introductory song from a concert from November of 1970 in Oakland.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the Black Panther Party is very proud to present the Lumping!
So can you see a movement to this? They got the puffy shirts like the Temptations used to wear. Right? So they were doing rhythm and blues. And it took a while to get them to talk about this, because each one said, I was a revolutionary, I was a Panther, I'm not a musician anymore, I don't want to talk about that. And it took a while for them to really realize that I wasn't going to make jokes about it. Okay? I was going to tell this story. And eventually they said, we used all the James Brown techniques. We ran on stage and started kicking high and stepping and moving and doing what you're supposed to do to make you want to see this band, to feel it. And when you're done, go tell your friends to go see it. They had all the performance techniques of rhythm and blues stars. You hear the lyrics? Okay, music class students, right? They're singing, we want freedom to determine the destiny of our community. Did you hear it? And then there's somebody going, say it louder. Give me some. That's the call and response, right? Your antiphony. You're having a conversation between the vocalists. And that's all the James Brown school. That's where they come from. And that's what they knew the audience. That's where the audience had come from. And the lyrics, we want freedom to determine the destiny of our community, that's straight out of the 10-point program that the Black Panther Party had written out and printed out. So they were connecting both the mission and the vision for Black liberation, and they were connecting to the community through soul music. That's them backstage. See the afros. Band leader William Calhoun, who was had experience as a band leader before he joined the Black Panther Party. And each one of them had a fascinating experience getting out of high school, developing their own craft, their own path before they decided to join the Black Panthers. And so we tell this story early in the book. If anyone's a fan of James Brown, diehard fans of James Brown, this song is called There Was a Time. The whole, I feel all right, is one of his most famous show starting songs. So if you were going to go to a James Brown concert at the very same time as these guys, James Brown would start with the same song. And of course the band, this is different from your generation. These folks that came out of the East Bay to join the party, a couple phone calls, they could find guys that knew how to play the music. Not just play music, knew how to play James Brown music the way James Brown music is supposed to be played. Okay. So that's how they're connecting to the community, using the community's skills. Like they did with everything else, with food giveaways and everything else. They used the skills in the community. Okay. So if you're walking by the auditorium when this is playing, over there at 58th and Grove Street, now Martin Luther King, you listen to this, it's kind of a jam. What are they doing in there? When you buy a ticket, what is this, the Black Panthers? I'm cool with the Panthers. I don't know if I want to join or not, but I'll listen to this. But then once you listen for a while, you go, wait a minute. Maybe, just maybe, I can get with these soul brothers. You You guys understand their appeal, their strategy for that? I'm going to do what Soul Brothers did. So I'm going to play you a couple minutes of this song where they introduce themselves, and you'll see that they weren't just playing games. They're actually playing a song by Curtis Mayfield. It's called People Get Ready. Have you guys heard of that song? It's one of the famous People Get Ready.
As you know, we're cutting live here at Barrows College. We'd like to dedicate our entire album to the Minister of Defense, Freedom Commander of the Black Panther Party, Huey P. Newton. On this particular song, we dedicate to Jonathan Jackson, to William Christmas, to James McLean, to Fred Hampton, Bob Clark, John Huggins, Alfred
These
Buckicott,
are all Panthers that have been killed.
and to the brother who was the beginning flew by the other. To all revolutionaries, that have given their lives in the cause of freedom throughout the world, we the Muffins respectfully dedicate this song. Yeah. Spring song. Won't you play everybody?
See how they hold the note? This isn't a joke.
We say people get ready.
I don't know if you caught the verse they said. People get ready, revolutions come. Their only ticket is a loaded gun. That's not quite what Curtis Mayfield said. Curtis Mayfield said, people get ready, freedoms come, you only, I forget what he said, it wasn't that. Okay. And this is part of the riddle of soul music, because soul music is always about peace and togetherness and harmony, and the harmonies are harmonious. We want soul music to unify people. But it was unifying people. It was unifying the black community around the idea of finally standing up to the power structure and joining the Black Panther Party for self-defense. You guys follow that? And if you start to pull it apart, the music of that era, you had other organizations, typically the black nationalist organizations, who were really, really into race-first rhetoric and language. Okay? And they really put down anybody that associated with interracial collaborations, whether political or social. And the Black Panther Party had a lot of beef with black nationalist organizations, because black nationalist organizations were essentially working on a racist theme. And that racist theme was whites aren't allowed. And they use a different style of music. And for some reason, if you look at the music that the black nationalists were listening to, whether it's the Mary Baraka, the US organization in the West Coast, they were heavy into this free jazz, where folks could go off and do poetry and real dissonant music would be played. And yet the Black Panther Party, for the most part, they stuck to the soul music, to the R&B. And that was sort of their calling card, which is a unified music. That brings up ideas of songs like Soul Man by Sam and Dave. Is anybody familiar with it? I'm a soul man. I can dance it if you want. But if you think about it, if you go really unpack that, they're singing, I'm a soul man. It's a song of celebration of black pride. I've got soul. I've got a certain way about me that I'm celebrating about being black. At the same time, it's a universal thing about I'm down, I'm natural, I'm an authentic person. And so anybody can enjoy I'm a soul man, but it's universal and it's specific to black folks. Do you guys follow how you can do both? It's tricky, it's a craft. Soul music is always a craft because you're working with the spirit of gospel music and the techniques of rhythm and blues, which are designed to get you to move and have fun and groove and get together. Right? So you want to work with that. And then these guys kind of took it to a third level, which is we're going to make people move and groove and get down with revolution. Get down with a commitment to changing this world, to changing the situation. So, pretty serious business as far as I was concerned. And the further I looked into it, the further the pieces came together. This is another person in the Black Panther Party, Elaine Brown. She was the leader in the 70s, and she actually made music. And this is her album that she made. Elaine Brown's 1969 album, Seize the Top. Okay. Hey, wait, what's her picture? Well, here's a picture of her, Elaine, singing with 3 members of the Lump. Her music was more ballads, more jazz ballads, that type of thing. But it's still around. There's a picture of them in the Black Panther Party paper. Saturday, December 26, 1970. The Lumpin', first revolutionary performance since returning in Bay Area from the East Coast singing tour. So they had some play. Ironically, a lot of us just forgot about them. When I asked around the campus, I asked the most esteemed historian on this campus. His name is Leon Litwack. And I went to his office hours. It took some courage to go to his office hours, and I would recommend, if you're an undergrad, this is your opportunity to deal with real esteemed thinkers, and you're allowed and almost expected to interact with them. So I would encourage you to go to their office hours and find out who they are and find out that, they eat cereal and milk just like everybody else, right? But they have an extra surplus of intellect that goes with it. I asked him, he knew a lot of Black history. I said, no, I didn't know they had a band. Okay, that means this is an obscure story if Leon Litwack doesn't know that they have a band. To reinforce this notion of how mythos and stereotype works. And the Black Panthers, for both reasons that the Black community wanted to sort of affirm a sense of, we have leaders, we have fighters for us, and then the outside community wanted to sort of marginalize these groups. It's like, you're so militant, you're not really of the community, you guys are separate. So this notion that these revolutionaries could dance, could get down and funky, that just didn't have any traction. Didn't go very far. And it fizzled away. Because I was a kid, and this magazine, the Black Panther Party, it came to the house. My mother had it. And so I had seen these pictures, but it didn't click until 30 years later. I went back and said, wait a minute. I went to the Bancroft Library and discovered this stuff. Right? This is pretty interesting. The Lumpin', the Freedom Messengers, their opening band. You guys see what they're playing? Molly Morrow and UC Berkeley, which they're busy tearing down right now, unfortunately. But, yeah. And this photo was actually on display for a couple of years at the Free Speech Cafe. You might go in the Free Speech Cafe and just get something to eat on your way in and out of the library. They have these big plaques with different historical events. And they had an old Black Power plaque, and that flyer was there, and that inspired me to get that, track it down, and put it in the book. That's the record, the single, Free Bobby Now. Bobby Seale was in jail, so the whole involved story. And so one thing about party music that I kind of wanted to emphasize is that it is three separate narratives. Okay? It's an insider's account of the history of the Black Panther Party at a crucial moment where they went from being these militants to folks that were still militant but developing community survival programs and developing a relationship with the community. Okay, the history of the party, an account of the upheaval in soul music at the end of the 60s, the revolution in rhythm and what I call the soul apocalypse that took place at the dawn of the 70s. And people that are familiar like Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, a lot of the great artists that we know went from making fairly standard sounding and looking music to going completely nuts with what they were saying and how they were saying it. And you can tell, you can look at their uniforms and the old black and white footage and folks who dressed clean. When they get to the 70s, they're funky. They're like, I don't care, I'm gonna do my thing and all the music. It's your thing, do your thing, express yourself. There was this whole thing about personal freedom that was going on in the 70s. Okay? So there was a soul apocalypse. And then the story of the Lumpin', the Black Panthers band, which operated from the summer of 1970 through the spring of 1971. Those are kind of woven together in the party music story. Okay? This is some of the artwork from Henry Douglas. This is some work of the Black Panthers, the Lumpin' members, two of them in formation. They eventually got rid of the uniforms, which was the berets and the black leather jackets and all of that. And they said we need to be engaged with the community, but they still did events where they would be in formation. There was a boycott of one of these stores where they had a tricky situation getting donations from this black-owned store. It got really convoluted, so Huey Newton organized party members to have a boycott, and so three of the Lumpin' members, you can see they're playing congas, they're sort of jazzing up the boycott with a picket line a little bit. So, and these are revolutionaries who can dance. That's them today. Like Bailey, Bonus, and William Cowell. Right? So that's about it. You can get all up into the soul music, but sort of make your own connection to how these things work. When you look at soul music from the 60s to the 70s, something happened. Something changed. And the Black Power movement was, if you will, main ingredient. To use the term from a soul group, it was the main ingredient for that thing. Okay? That's my main point. That's what I came to tell you guys. A few questions, and then we have a guest I want to introduce to you also and explain. Any questions jumping off about the stories and how this discovery of this group took place?
So where are the Black Panthers now?
It's a great question. I'll keep it short because James Mott can answer some of that. They're preparing a 50th anniversary, because the fall of '66, fall of 2016 will be their 50th. The organization officially ended around 80, 81, 82. Other members of the group went into other forms of community activism, community churches, things like that. We work in the community at a church. It's not necessarily religious domination, but social service work. And for some reason, however, that their legacy continues. People still want to know who these people are. 49 years later, it's pretty fascinating what happens. And there are some folks that call themselves the New Black Panthers, and they take on different forms, typically of the militancy that the Panthers presented, and it's really problematic, particularly for the original Panthers. And every now and then they'll bring Bobby Seale out on CNN to say, no, that's not us. We did it's pretty amazing that they lasted as long as they did, and the legacy. Most folks, and the Lumpen members that I got to know, you know, they just lived their lives in the community, not necessarily, you know, trying to call attention to themselves, but doing the daily work of just community work that needs to be done. And when you look at what happened, all the different things the Black Panther Party did, all through the country, all around the world, daily work, like it wouldn't have happened, nothing would have happened if, you know, you have your dozen leaders, your Eldridge Cleaver and your Elaine Brown and your Huey and Bobby. Those are 12 people, but there were thousands of folks doing the invisible daily work of the organization. Something glued them all together that they all were committed to doing this work. And that's how we survived then. And that's kind of the question today. What can get young people or a new generation committed to that type of sacrifice, that type of work? And I would like to say, even if you guys don't ask this question, what's the role of music in social movements today? Okay. And for a lot of folks that I know that are young activists, the Kendrick Lamar album just screams to them. How many of you guys have heard the Kendrick Lamar album? About half the class? Yeah. And that's great. If that will sort of pique people's interest and make people think that there's something larger than us, gluing us together so that we can make a connection with other people that think there's something larger than us. Okay? And if you listen to the whole Kendrick Lamar album, he does a whole bit where he's in this sort of made-up conversation with Tupac, right? Am I giving away too many secrets? At the end of the Kendrick Lamar album, he's talking to Tupac, right? Asking him, you know, what's it going to take to get some real change going, to really make some change going. Right? And so to this generation, Tupac is seen as this visionary. It's ahead of, well, go ahead and study Tupac. Right? Where does Tupac come from? His mother was a member of this organization. Feni Shakur, and there's a whole section in Party Music about what Feni Shakur did in New York City and the time she had to spend in the New York City correctional facilities as part of the New York 21 and all this that happened. She got out, she had Tupac, she had to live close to the edge, but she raised him to have this vision, this sort of conscious, political, and street at the same time. And Tupac fans are kind of what you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, all those pieces fit. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. Really interesting and important work. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the band's name, Lumpen, and I noticed it was all in caps. Is it an acronym?
No, it's not. That was just, I guess, for the PowerPoint to kind of make it stand out. But remember when I said at the top that like revolution was in the air? There was conversations with Marxist revolutionaries all the time, at least in the Bay Area, at least in the East Bay. I don't know if you get further out to Mountain View and Walnut Creek, they had these conversations, but they had them around here. And one thing, and I want to bring James Mott up here to explain some of this, but Panther Party members had to go through political education. They had to read, they had to teach classes on social change and the history of social movements to get involved. And so lumpen was a term that Karl Marx used as a sort of a put down for this group of people that was sort of unfixable. These are the bums and the pimps and prostitutes and beggars, and he had different names, Marx did. But you know, he gave this real profound class analysis of society, right? Where you have your elites, and you run everything. You have your bourgeoisie, your sort of middle class with their nose in the air that wants to be elite. And so they go to colleges to try to learn how to keep the proletariat in line, right? That's how he would explain explain it, but then he said below the working class, the proletariat, or sort of off to the side, is the lumpen proletariat. These are the folks that are unfixable. They won't become part of the engine of the working class, the revolution that's going to take place. And so what happened was Huey and Bobby and another writer named Franz Fanon was really into this analysis and said, you know, the poorest of the poor, the bottom, that's the black folks. Okay, that's the hood, the thugs. These are the hard heads. These people, if you transform them, they become the spear of the tip of the spear type of thing. That was the rhetoric that was being used. Okay? So when you said lumpen proletariat, it was something that was getting kind of flipped around. Said these are some street cats that can't be messed with, and that's how they were rationalized. And so the term lumpen did exactly that. Because somebody would come to a show and say, "I like this show. What does the name lumpen mean?" And they get an answer, and they say, "You know, it's to say that that's you, and you can be transformed into another Malcolm X." Malcolm's story was what was used as the model. You know, Malcolm became a lumpen proletariat. He was a thug. He was a drug addict. He was a criminal. He seemed unsavable, right? And so what happened? Something happened. He got saved. He got fixed. He transformed the world. Right? So that's the thing. What I would like to do is bring on one of the original members of the lumpen, so you guys can meet him and just see what it's like to live a life as a Panther, as a musician, and still be here to tell about it. I want to introduce to you, his name is Pastor Saturn, formerly James Mott.
Well, it's good to be here today. Where are my athletes at? Right over there. I want to start off by telling a quick story of what led me to the party. And I want you to understand that it started on the college campus with you and Bobby. And many people from all over the nation were on the college campus at the time. My story begins, I was a senior in high school, and I decided to create a senior cut day. I don't know if it was fate or what, and I went by myself. I went downtown Sacramento. I happened to be down there watching Ronald Reagan with a group of what they call young Americans. And I look on the side and I see these guys and people walking in the north area, north of the campus. I'm facing it on J Street this way, and here is the Capitol. And I see all these guys in black going up. I thought they had sticks at first, right? So I run up there and I found out that they actually had weapons, and they were there to protest the Mulford Act, which was the right for us to bear arms as people and to actually defend yourself in any capacity. It was a de-arming of the community. And after that, I didn't join the party right away. I was fascinated with the story. I had a chance to. I actually walked in there behind them. And it was a sight that I never will forget. Actually, legislators were cowering underneath the table. And they were walking by, and Bobby was reading why our constitutional rights were being violated, why the Mulford Act was actually against the community and against the people having the right to defend themselves, because police brutality was just as rampant as it is today. It's like going full circle. My story began, I joined the party right after Bobby Hutton was killed. I asked myself, what was a 17-year-old? Why was he involved in an organization that put himself on the line and in danger? Patrolling police officers, standing 20 feet behind him with a law book reading you your rights. Nowadays we have technology and cameras. But then we actually tell a person, no, according to this Constitution right, he cannot go in your car and search you. He cannot go in your pockets. They hated that. And we also realized that if in fact that you said that you were going to harm us to try to stop us, we still had the right to defend ourselves, so we would patrol with shotguns. But the real story for me begins, I was in college, I was at City College, Sacramento City College. We had a very, 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 one more very good track and field team. We were about to go to the West Coast Relays. Tommy Smith, Lee Evans, and all them, they regularly run at Panther Stadiums. Ironically, it was the Sacramento City Panthers. They would run at Panther Stadium with track meets. And we asked them before they went to the Olympics, what are you going to do? Are you going to do what you said? We knew about the stand they were going to take before most of the country did, because we had also talked with Harry Edwards. And as athletes, we'd all run together and we would discuss the issues that confronted our community. We realized that we had to be the people who made a stand and spoke out, because we all understood what was going on. We called ourselves declassified intellectuals, and I'll explain that in a moment. I remember it was a spring day. I come in from practice. I said, we're going to do well this year. My coach, Coach Jim Sackett, he said, Mott, is that you? I said, yeah, it's me. He said, I need to see you. I said, what did I do now? I know I came in from practice a little early. He says, I need you to sit down. He says, I had 2 visitors today. I said, 2 visitors? Well, how does that concern me? He said, the 2 visitors were from the FBI. I said, oh, really? I said, what did they want? They left their card, and they have a proposition for you. I said, for me? For what reason? He said they wanted you to know that if, in fact, that you stop organizing on campus and left the Black Panther Party, they would send you to any school in the country. I said, oh, really? My grades were decent. They were good. So I started joking about it. I said, to Princeton? He said, yeah, to Princeton. I said, UC Berkeley. He said, UC Berkeley. I said, Harvard. He said, all right, stop joking. Because he was kind of upset, and I saw it in his face. He said, they told me to tell you, either you do this or else. Suffer the consequences. So here was a man, he was from Indiana. And remember, this was 1960, 68, 69. And the movement was just beginning. But I never will forget the tears in his eyes when he told me, what are you going to do? We were standing about maybe very, very close to one another. And I told him, I said, Coach, I have to do what I have to do. I'm going to stay in the party, and I'm going to make a difference. And he grabbed me and gave me this biggest bear hug. He said, I respect you for that. You stand by your convictions. Well, after that season, 1969, I didn't have too much contact with him because in 1969 is when J. Edgar Hoover created a mandate, destroy by any means necessary, eradicate the Black Panther Party. We would regularly deliver papers in Sacramento to Ronald Reagan, the governor. He knew me personally, as well as the members in that area. We were the second office attacked in Sacramento, California. I was in the office that day at the time. I want you to also understand that people from all over the country, no different from anybody in this room, were leaders in their own right. We're all community leaders. We came under the auspices of the party. You had a leadership group, but nobody knew how to tell us how to construct the various social programs that we created. And Rickey touched on that aspect because we said that it is a movement of people. Our coalitions were extended from everyone from the Peace and Freedom Party to the Brown Berets, to the Young Lords, to the Filipino organization. We had the Asian organization. We had even the White Panther Party. Interestingly enough, the White Panther Party was composed of people actually from West Virginia. You know, the Jed Clampett family. Here you have blacks and whites, people from all walks of life, working programs. They had breakfast programs. They had health clinics. We had over 30-something social programs. The realization was this, that it wasn't a fact that we wore black leather jackets and berets in the initial aspect. It was what we began to understand of creating self-sufficiency in our communities, which spread throughout the nation. We no longer had to depend upon a system of a government of people who didn't want to include you in anything anyway. So not only the Breakfast for School Children program, which now feeds over 32 million in America, breakfast and lunch. That came from the Black Panther Party. Free health clinics. We had 19 free health clinics. We say it was the first universal health care. And we established the clinics for the help of medics that came back from Vietnam. And we were doing testing, and we were actually, it was a full clinic. We had doctors and nurses. We created WIC, Women and Infant Children program with a partnership with Children's Hospital. Also, you had Seniors Against a Fearful Environment, where we worked with seniors, we took them to their appointments. It was a forerunner to paratransit. I could go on and on and on. We created modern social service programs. And Rickey touched on the fact that a lot of the nationalist organizations fell out with us because they said we were going in the wrong direction. And we said this is a people's movement. And I think that's what gave us a lot of longevity as far as that is concerned. And I also want to let you know, when he talked about, I want to tell you a little bit more about Clark Bailey. We used to call it, his nickname was Santa Rita. Don't ask me, you can ask me why he got the name Santa Rita. Pretty much you can guess why. He would always spend a little time in Santa Rita. We're talking a place out there in Dublin. So,
county jail.
Yeah, county jail. So, and here is a man from the community who was an accomplished accomplished pianist. He had a full scholarship at Stanford in music. Michael Torrance had received a full scholarship for the work that he had done. He was fully paid to go into San Jose State. Bill Calhoun, he was also an accomplished musician, and he's also a DJ at Queso. And you know a little bit about my story that I told you. So we were all college students. We were all capable of thinking, and we could have went in any direction that we did. So this was true of people all over the nation. Not only true of us, but also of all the other ethnic groups, the young whites who worked with us all over the country. We saw the same things, and we worked together to try to make changes in this nation. Now we know, as we see what's happening today, and I'm telling you, people tell us that we would prophesize or we would be able to see the inside of what's going to happen in the future. And I'm telling you now, it's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse before it does. But the thing about it is now, it's not just relegated to the black community. It's relegated to each and every one of you. It's a mandate that's taking place in this country that is changing the whole dynamics. It's shifting. It's a total control of anyone who goes against the structure as it is. And you're going to see more and more of that. So it is going to take all of you working together. Some of you may never go to a rally. Some of you may never go into a protest. But even just by speaking to your friends, your family, and standing up and saying, this is not right. All lives matter, just not black lives. All your lives matter. But I'm here to tell you, when we had to do a breakfast program, nobody gave us a blueprint. When it came from the Central Committee, and Bobby talks about this today, we never questioned, well, how are we going to do this? We said, what do we need to do? Go start a health clinic. Start a health clinic? Okay. So we learned and we did it because we all were always leaders in our own right who came under the auspices of the Black Panther Party overall. I want to say something else about Huey P. Newton. I don't know if you know, you can Google this. There's a book called On Common Ground that he and Eric Erickson, the predecessor to Sigmund Freud, wrote. Here is a man coming all the way from Europe to sit and write and talk to a man from West Oakland, who at 16 was told that he was illiterate and never would be. So they wrote this book together. And it's a very fascinating expose of how we looked at society and how we looked at how people grew and how things would stop people from growing and how the society was against certain people in their efforts to be part of it. And this book is 147 pages. So I just wanted to point out the brilliance that was involved there as the main theoretician in Huey P. Newton. But the other aspect is simply this. As musicians, when Rickey first contacted us, we always would tell him that, and we told him exactly the same thing before any of us had even talked to each other. We told him that this was something that we did. It was like if you had a specific talent, and if you were an artist, and we needed somebody to draw pictures or do an art show or whatever it may be, you lended all your talents to that effort because we understood the dynamics. That's why J. Edgar Hoover made the statement, the Breakfast for School Children program is danger to the internal security of the United States. They understood that once you wake up people, anything is possible. Once you wake up the mind, you understand that change will take place. So we would have liberation schools. One thing that wasn't talked about, I don't know if you know, that we had a school in Oakland called the Oakland Community School. It was the only school, and actually, Jerry Brown was governor then. Seems like he never goes away, right? He was actually governor back then. We received an award of educational excellence. There's no other school in California in the history that received one. And it was so ironic. Here it is with Huey P. Newton standing in front of Republicans and Democrats. The Republicans, they were just sitting there like, and once the children came up, we had a group of children involved, and how eloquently they spoke. Many of them have gone on to a school. They become teachers, professors, business professionals, entertainment, you name it. And it was all because of what was done. We set a model as far as education is concerned. We, last year, were awarded by Mills College for a model of educational excellence and how teachers have to become more involved with not only the students but the community. That's where the concept of each one teach one came from. And critical thinking. It was in 1973 all the way to 1982 at the Oakland Community School, these concepts came about. So my part, as far as the party was concerned, and everything that we did, we did because this was something that we knew that we were able to do by lending everything and putting our heart and soul into it. So yeah, we were musicians. We were all musicians in our own right. We were no slouches. As a matter of fact, if we hadn't been dedicated to the party, I remember Suzanne the Paz, Lenny. At the Oakland Community School, there was a lot of rehearsing going on. We had all the groups, Frankie Beverly, Tower Power. They had all come to the Oakland Community School, 6118 East 14th Street, and we had a rehearsal area. One day he took a tape to her and Motown, and they wanted to record us, but we didn't do it. As Elaine Brown, when she got her contract through Motown, all the funds that she got put right back into the party, into the programs. It was a selfless effort. So everything that we did was not for self-gratification. It was not to promote ourselves. It was to continue the work that needed to be done. We didn't realize the effect that we would have, because honestly, we weren't supposed to be here. I'm going to say that one more time. We were not still supposed to be here, because we were told that we were going to die. And it got to the point, I want you to imagine anyone in a situation where you're told we're going to kill you if you continue what you're doing. And this was coming from the government, the federal government. And the fact of the matter is that we got so used to it because party members started being killed. Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, the Seventh with John Huggins and Bunchy Carter in Southern California, and the list goes on. We still, to this day, have people who are locked up. Momia, Eddie Guthrie, he just got, one of the brothers just got released after being in prison for 44 years. And it was not because, I think there was a reporter who talked about, they were talking about WikiLeaks, and they mentioned Momia and people like him. And he said, I'm afraid of what's happening in America. The censorship that's taking place. If you notice the press, there's no more free press anymore. They don't report anything because they're told not to out of fear of reprisals from the U.S. government. We are actually seeing this nation turn into what we've always said about other countries. And the world sees us at this point. We've become one of the most repressive nations in the world. Most police departments say we will come and train the American on how they should conduct themselves with the community. I don't know, there's this kill, 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 shoot, shoot, shoot attitude. And if, I don't care what color you are today, if you're with me and you stand up, then you're subject to the same. So we have to understand the dynamics that we embraced then that are still now. Do I think any different? Of course not. We don't think any different. And someone asked where the Panthers are now. Many of them are still active in the communities all over the country. There's a film out by Stanley Nelson you'll hear more about. It's called The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution. And it's a 2-hour film, and it covers the early years. It doesn't go into the survival programs. It will probably take a mini-series to do that in the school and all the other things that were done at that point in time. But it's already going to be shown in 8 cities that are filming here with the Sundance Film Festival. They want to get it all across America. Not for the point of showing these guys in black berets and leather jackets. And Eric Erickson even told you, I admire you for when you went out to bring attention to the fact of what was needed. He said that's why we did it. We wanted to bring attention to the fact of police brutality. We weren't going to stand for it anymore. We were going to stand for people being unjustly killed, unjustly murdered, and also unjustly imprisoned, which is still going on. It's almost like full circle. I mean, I couldn't retire if I wanted to. I mean, we joke about this. If I'd have known we'd still been here, we'd have created a Panther pension fund. So, but here we are today, still doing what we're doing, and we're still participating. Now, the 50th anniversary is coming up, and this East Bay area is a celebration of all of us. It's marking the fact of the Black Panther Party, but it's going to talk about the coalitions and all the wonderful people that made changes in this country. Don't forget about the students at Kent State that were killed. Don't forget about the students at Mississippi State. Don't forget about how it started at San Francisco State with the mass riots when Hayakawa was present over there. And also things that went on at UC Berkeley. I was out here with People's Park. I remember that era too. So these things have to be kept in mind. And now, guess what? With all that's going on, we have to understand there's no room for division. There's no room for selfishness. And there's no room for me or I. It's all about you working together in every capacity. Some of you have skills. I wish that we had the technology you have now. We had a program called the 10-10-10 program, that if something happened to any one of you, there would be a neighbor. You know, like they have neighborhood watch. Well, it was truly neighborhood watch. One person will call 10 people. Then each one of those people will call 10 people. So within a matter of 5 or 10 minutes, you might have 200 or 300, 1,000 people there at a location for you. Imagine what can be done through social media now. I would call it a social justice website, where information can be gotten out to support student movements, to support community movements, but everybody supporting one another. Today I see a lot of isolation. I see a lot of people departmentalizing what they want to do and not working with one another as they should, and in unison and in coalition. One thing that we realize is this, is like with Asada, who's, actually talking about Tupac, I actually changed his diapers, you know, when his mother back in New York, after she got out of New York 21, he got his writing abilities from her. He got his lyrics, his ability, because she was a tremendous poetry writer. Her lyrics and what she would put in poetry would spell out a total story. Of course, you know the story of his auntie who's still in Cuba. And we're still trying to figure out why she's considered the most dangerous terrorist in the world. $2 million bounty on her, and that's why they're trying to open up Cuba, but the Cuban government said, we're not going to send her back. They offered up 5, this is ludicrous, we'll trade you 5 Cubans for Asada. So we beg the question, well, where does that put us? My philosophy hasn't changed. I think the same things that she thinks. So where does that put us? This is another thing that we talk about as former party members with the same philosophy and ideology that we have, because we all stay in close contact. If, in fact, the knowledge and experience that we had isn't passed on, there will be a great void as far as we're feeling in terms of what can and cannot be done. And I beg the question to you, that is one of the most important things right now. And that's what we've been doing with youth groups, student groups, community groups, passing on knowledge, not telling you what to do, passing on knowledge and experience, and especially what we know about this government. There are some dark days ahead, so some rainy, cloudy days ahead for us all, because this nation is not going to change. It's not going to change quickly. So you cannot rest and you cannot stop. And we have to stop being reacting. You know, it's like for every action, there's a reaction. Something happens to someone, we go out and protest, people march, then it dies down until the next event, then the next event. It has to be maybe something consistent, that's conversation that goes on in every quarter. Well, I don't care what community you come from. I don't care what your ideology is in terms of what I don't necessarily agree with that part. But do we all agree that everyone has a right to live? How many people here feel that we all have a right to have a decent life? If you please raise your hand. We all have a right to live in this nation and participate. We all have a right to eat. We all have a right to decent housing. We all have a right to decent education. We have a right to fair trials, but none of these things are happening. We say we're still at point number 1. We want freedom. We want the power to determine the destiny of our communities and our lives. So these are questions that we have to consider and work on. So everything that you do and you learn, I don't care where you go in life, remember, do not lose your fervor in terms of human rights and the rights for all of us in this nation. And remembering the work that the party did. You know, because one day we might not all be here. I plan on being here another 100 years or so if I can. Because the idea about the music is so important. We see what has happened with music. We know music actually creates a psychological way of thinking and acting. And we are preparing to have panel discussions with major rappers who are positive people to combat. You can't turn positive into negative, derogatory language, creating incidents where people actually want to go out and kill. They did a study, and Rickey remembers this. They talked about we don't want soul music anymore. The reason is because it gives you a feeling of power. It gives you a feeling of, it's like a march. It's like, I can accomplish anything. You can't stop me. So now it's been replaced with derogatory terms for women, derogatory terms for men, derogatory terms for the community, derogatory thinking, which leads to derogatory action. If I say I'm going to kill somebody long enough and I'm singing those lyrics, it becomes like a trance-like state. As soon as somebody makes me mad, it happens. As soon as somebody upsets me, I do the wrong thing because of what I'm being bombarded with. So we have to, you know, it's okay about the beat and those kind of things. We have to be very careful of what to listen to. And your sisters, your young nieces and nephews and brothers, imagine what these kids are learning and seeing. And they may be the nemesis that you have to face one day because of their mindset that's been changed around with a negative input. It's not done by accident. The industry has done that on purpose. And again, that's another story. But I'm going to stop right there. I think I've talked enough, and I was just going to say that if anybody has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. But I thank you again for even having Rickey to be able to do this and remembering the legacy of the party. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Hi. Did the band ever talk about the 1969 Pan-African Festival or Miriam Makeba or things like that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Mary McCabe, we at the Oakland Community School, Abby Lincoln, we had a lot of those very artists would come to the Oakland Community School because we were doing a lot of concerts and events that we would do what we call back then radiothons. There was a radio station called KDIA, and they would broadcast a fundraiser for the school. We had everybody from them to Don Cornelius. We had Eric Soul Train. We had them all come and support what we did. So music was a big part of everything that we did. We'd have Sunday forums, Tower Power. Everybody would participate in working for getting the word out through music as well as community gathering. But what we would have was that people from all over the community come, black, white, Hispanic, everybody would come to East Oakland and participate in this. So yes, we were very aware of that. Mary McKeever, go ahead, Rickey.
I think some Panther leadership was at that panel.
Yes.
That's right. At the time.
Yes.
I don't know if the conversation about bringing them up took place.
We did do an event with Muhammad Ali and Curtis Mayfield at San Quentin Prison. I think we got out maybe about 2 lines before the guards pulled the plug on our music. They wouldn't allow us to sing, you know, Muhammad Ali. Curtis was singing his songs, but as we got to singing our revolutionary material, and the guys in the prison just went wild on this love what we're saying. They pulled the plug on us at that point in time. We also opened up a concert. We did a thing with the Grateful Dead. We did a lot of concerts with a lot of progressive organizations and groups all back east, and we were headed for a second concert when Mr. Cleaver decided to do what he did at the point in time. And I want to clarify something. There never was a split. It was just one group of people in New York who decided that they were going to go, and it was all about this. You are not revolutionaries. Why? Because you're feeding children. That's what the split was about. Survival programs are counter-revolutionary. Oh. Feeding the community is counter-revolutionary. Oh. Coalitions with other people and organizations is counter-revolutionary. Oh. So that's what basically that was about. Any other questions? Yes.
Did Curtis ever hear your cover of People Get Ready?
I'm pretty sure he did. I'm pretty sure he did hear it. It was interesting because during the '73 campaign for Bobby Seale and Elaine was running for councilwoman in Oakland for mayor. And actually, I wish we had the apparatus for you know, the voting situation. You remember we were all going all the way back to Gore and Bush about the votes and what they found out in Florida, and the commission found out that they had really cheated and thrown away votes, but nothing happened to it. Well, we know for a fact that Bobby should have won that campaign when he ran against Oakland Mayor Redding at the time. But we know there was some shenanigans going there because we had registered everybody in the community. We had registered, you talk about the lumping, we had registered, made sure that every wino had registered, every player had registered, Everybody on the street, the ladies of the night, everybody in the community have registered to vote. So as we looked at it, as a matter of fact, the precinct that I worked in, which I had mentioned to Jean Quan last year when she was mayor, when she first ran her campaign, one of her campaign members said, see that guy right there? He still has the record for the highest voter turnout in the district in East Oakland. It was like 99%. You know, in my area, it was from 73rd to 98th Avenue. 99% voters in the community. That was totally unheard of. And I don't think anybody has that record today. Any other questions? Okay. Well, all right. Well, I thank you for your time.
Make a little bit of this connection between soldiers and Black Power. Just to connect, because some of y'all know me from the funk book. The reason I got into this investigation was I was trying to really find out where the funk came from. And structurally, musically, as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you guys a heads up. I'm going to show you, I'm going to play you a bit of an interview I did with James Brown. And I asked him where the funk came from. And so structurally, we can put a time frame for when the funk happened. But in terms of trying to figure out why, how, party music explains a lot of that. I asked one of the musicians in the Lumpin' band, I said, what do you think about Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud? He said, it's the greatest song I ever heard. Because before that, it was I'm Black and I'm Ashamed. And he had lived the humiliation so much, the transformation. It's just so overwhelming to him. He said, you know, it just changes everything. So that sort of is kind of central to what the book is about, and sort of going a little deeper into the funk than just sort of an evolution of styles and things like that. This is a prototype.
Are we on? Okay, Mr. Brown, Mr. Brown, Mr. Brown. James Brown.
Just having fun with the remix.
Mr. Brown, Mr. Brown, Mr. Brown.
James Brown.
Let me ask you about the funk. Let me ask you about the funk. Let me ask you about the funk, your invention, your creation, you and your band and the peoples and the times where the funk was born. I want to know about what was going on tour in 66, 67, 68. People say that was where something happened, where the first funk lick, the first funk groove. Some people say
got a brand new band.
that was it? Okay.
That was a turn around song.
Yeah.
Turn everybody around. Because I went on 1 and 3 as opposed to the music being written on 2 and 4. But I also took gospel and jazz and defied all the laws. If I played 8 bars and felt like I could play 9 or 10, I played 9 or 10. As long as I felt the people grooving. I went on 1 and 3 as opposed to the music being written on 2 and 4. I went on 1 and 3 as opposed to the music being written on 2 and 4.
Just so you know. Get that.
I went on 1 and 3
some debate about the first funk song. He clears it up.
Influence like that on Bootsy Collins?
Oh, I turn all them around. Bootsy used to laugh when I used to tell him to get on the one, just fall on the ground and laugh. This is what I'm talking about. I started that word, get on the one.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
He paid attention to you, though.
Well, late, but he came out of the later, see? I'm like his father now. He swears by James Brown because he understands it. I started that word, get on the one. I started that word, get on the one.
Got it. So that'll be on the Rickey Vincent CD in about a year. Look for that on iTunes. But yeah, that was 1965. So planning 50th anniversary of the funk for next month at KPFA. Check that out. So I got a few flyers for the show, some flyers for the course I want you guys to know about. Black Panther Party and Popular Culture, so we will explore a little more of the history of the party and then its relationship to the mainstream media. We'll get into things like, anybody see the Forrest Gump movie?
Yeah.
Right? Almost everybody's seen Forrest Gump. Do you remember his encounter with the Black Panthers in Forrest Gump? Right? He's like, I'm sorry, I crashed your Black Panther party. It's sort of,
Yeah.
as a way of absorbing this, it's really something that isn't meant to fit. Right? There's a process of sort of commodifying, absorbing, neutralizing something that won't go away. And I'm sure there'll be some other movies that are kind of sweeping narratives of Americana, and the Panthers will be in that too.
Yeah, I just want to mention, Tom Hanks grew up in Oakland. He actually used to come and hang out with rallies and listen. He used to come down and hang out with party members. They talked about that, I think, on David Letterman. Yeah, so he grew up in this area. So yeah, I think that's maybe why he had part of it put in there.
So yeah, so anyways, I'm doing this summer. You guys are welcome to check it out. There's some books, the funk book and the art music book, and the show